Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear review. Today we're looking at the Casio Calculator Watch series. We're looking at the old school version and the new school version, the Databank version. So the CA-53 or the CA-506, those are a la 1980s, and then the CA or the DBC 611 and also the DBC 32. Those are the more modern versions, the Databank versions. Now, just so you know, I actually had one of these watches when I was a kid. What was it? Probably mid 80s, like 87-ish, somewhere in there. I kind of refer to this as the DeLorean watch because, you know, Back to the Future, the DeLorean just kind of took off as far as popularity goes, and this watch definitely has that vibe of a DeLorean style car. It's not actually a DeLorean watch, but it's one of those watches that just looks like it comes from that era of the 1980s. You've got that almost integrated look, bracelet look on here. A hair puller for sure from the 1980s. That was one of the reasons why I got rid of the watch. I didn't have it for more than a handful of months, and it was gone. I did not like it at all. So anyway, we're going to have a little throwdown between these two style of watches. We're going to have these two together, and then we're also going to take these two Databanks and put them against each other and just see where we end up at the end. Now, there's some pretty significant differences between these watches, so it's not entirely fair to compare these two watches based off of function because the functions are clearly different between a Databank and a calculator-only style watch. But there's some things about these watches that are strengths on the 1980s versions and the updated Databank versions, so we'll go through those. So starting off, let's go through the 5 things we typically go through: size, fitment, finish, accuracy, legibility, and light. So the size of the watch, obviously the Databanks are much larger. So if you have a small wrist, this watch has a very, very good chance that this is going to be draping over outside of the overall width of your wrist. So keep that in mind. It's not for the small wristed. Either one of these, I think the DBC 611 is just a little bit shorter than the DBC 32. So that is something to keep in mind also, that between these two watches, you're going to have some variability as well. Now, when it comes down to the fitment, I love the fitment. I have on each one of these, I have a metal bracelet and I have the resin or the rubber bracelet. For fitment, we have the metal bracelet with the adjustable base clasp here and the hook style clasp where you just hook it onto the bar, right like this, okay? And then you snap it down. I love this system. This is one of my favorite adjustable systems on here. Very easy to adjust the base. You put a little screwdriver in here, pop up that plate, and it slides up and down on the bracelet. So as far as adjustability and fit on this watch, I love it. I think it's great. Now on the regular resin band, classic Casio thing, it's, you know, the holes are just too far apart. You don't get a really fine-tuned fit either way. So both of these straps suffer from the same thing. But I really do like the metal bracelet. I think the metal strap, whatever you want to call it, because it's not really a bracelet, but the metal strap itself is really great. The 506 has the same adjustable base and it has the same hook clasp on it as well. So it is classic again for both of these. They both fit about the same. Okay. Now, what about finish? Finish, I like the Casio finish for Casio watches. I have a hard time buying the metal versions because the resin version or the dull black version, it's just kind of that classic look that I like. So when it comes down to the metal version between these two metal, I'm going to give it to the 611. I'm not a huge fan of the large links, or the large look of the links. I like the finer links here as well. It does fit a little bit more closely to the wrist. You get a little better articulation. You get a higher or a bigger radius off of the larger links. So I think you get a better, I don't know, more comfortable fit with this style strap or bracelet. But you do run the possibility of this becoming a little bit more of a hair puller. I haven't found that yet. I do wear this one on occasion. And I actually like it because I'll get to that here in a second. But I do like to wear this watch. I don't wear this one hardly at all because if I'm going to wear this watch, I typically go for the CA-53. Okay, so we're going to give this one over to the Databank. So they're up by 1. All right, what about finish? All right, the finish of these watches is pretty much the same. Now we're going to get into the buttons on the keypad here, because the buttons on the keypad I think really play a big role on why you get this watch. So on the DBCs, the Databanks, you have two different versions. You have kind of a midway point between the flat style of the 611, and you also have the very, very distinct raised buttons on the CA-53 or the 506, okay? So between these two, you end up with the DBC-32, okay? I like the buttons on the DBC-32, but I'll tell you what, the one I like the most is this one. I like the 611 the most. There's something about these buttons where I don't feel like I have to hit the exact location of the button on here, whereas when you have these raised buttons, you feel like you got to get that fingernail right on top of that button and type things in that way. So a little bit different on here, just different feel. I feel like I'm just not as clumsy with this keypad as I am with the 53 or the 32. Now, the 506 is the same as the 53, so I'm not talking about the 506 right now because they're both the exact same thing except for the case and the strap. So those two things, you know, inconsequential when it comes down to talking about the keypad. But I do like this keypad the most, and if I was to pick a second one, I do like this one the second most. I think this one is just the hardest one to use of the three style keypads. I've used them. You go to let's say the stopwatch function here. There it is. Start, stop. That is great because the buttons are at the bottom. But when you have to reach up over into and get above and between different buttons, it becomes a little more cumbersome, I think. And I think part of that might be the real estate. It looks like it's about the same, but it doesn't feel like it. I don't know. So I'm going to give this one to the Databanks. I like the Databank setup better for that reason. Also on the finish, the display. So we have to look at the displays. So we have, and again, I'm going to hold up just these three because the 506 really is the same thing. So as far as the displays go, I give the DBC-32 the best score for legibility of the time. Also, the day of the week is bigger. Okay, I don't really care about the year. And to me, the date on the two Databanks are about the same. You don't see the date on the CA-53. So when it comes down to legibility or just the finish of the display, the DBC-32 is going to get it. All right, that's my opinion. Now, what else is there? You've got the finishing on the buttons on the side, and I like the buttons on the 32 the most. I think they're the best when it comes down to it. This is just old school. All right, this was back in the day when they didn't have a lot of experience making these watches yet, and so obviously this changed over time. The 506, I actually like the buttons on here. You'll notice that the mode button is wider. So it's not quite so, round. It's like a peg here. It's wider. It's like a bar right here. So for me, the 506 is a much better version than the CA-53. Okay, but that's old school versus old school. Old school versus new school, definitely going to give it to the new school. The buttons, obviously, they've improved the buttons over time. So what about the crystal? So the crystal is basically, you've got a much bigger display on the DBC-32. They both have a flat crystal. There's a little bit of an arc to the DBC-32, but overall, it's just a bigger display, bigger reflection surface. So if you're concerned about reflections, go with the Classic. Now, as far as the finish goes, I prefer, again, I like the Casio, the resin finish for Casios in general. Although if there's any of the Casios that are out there, this one sticks to me as being the one I would get the metal version of. And mostly because I grew up wearing this watch. I mean, I wore it for a number of months. And so for me, I guess it's got a little bit of a psychological bias for me wearing this one. And I've been wearing this, a fair amount of time, and I haven't had the hair pulling experience. So I'm actually kind of like, you know what? I like this one because it brings me back to my ute. So if you've ever watched My Cousin Vinny, you know what I mean by ute. All right, it brings me back to my ute. So finish-wise, I would give it to the Databank. So one more point. So they're up 2 points on this one. Now, what about legibility and light? Legibility clearly goes to the Databank. Light clearly goes to the Databank. Neither one of these, because they're both the same module, has a light. And this really is the biggest problem I have with the CA-53 or the 506. No light, hard to use in low light conditions. Certainly in dark conditions, you're not going to see this. So that's too bad. Now, what about water resistance? Okay, so they're up by 3-0. Water resistance. Both of these have a water resistance rating, which means that the Databanks, you're not even supposed to get these splash wet. Okay, you're not supposed to splash on them, wash your hands, any of that stuff. Now, I have, and I haven't found that to be an issue. I'm certainly not going to go swimming with these watches, but I don't think splashing water on here is all that big of a deal. But the longer the water stays, the longer the water is like on the case and around the buttons here, I think the worse off you're going to be. So just be careful about that, because there is no water resistance rating on this. There is 0 water resistance rating from Casio on this. But on these, this is hand wash safe. Some people have gone swimming with these. There's a lot of Casios that have just water resistance, and people swim with them. Okay, I don't know how long they're swimming with it, like if they're just kind of jumping in, messing around, getting out, or if they're swimming for 30-40 minutes at a time in the water. And I think that's probably where the water resistance rating is going to catch up with them. But anyway, points go to the old school on this one, so 3-1. Now, overall uses of these watches, this is where it's pretty close. The calculator functions on here are all there. All the calculator functions on the old school are on the Databank. The Databank has, obviously, with it, the Databank system. Now, this is where, if you look at my review on this watch, the DBC32, this is, for me, the greatest traveling watch, not traveler watch, traveling, when you're actually traveling, watch that you can wear, because you can put on here all of the phone numbers that you need to have when it comes down to car breaks down, insurance, home insurance, lawyer, legal advice. We're talking phone numbers here, not policy numbers. What else? Law enforcement facilities. So if you're overseas, the phone number of the local police station. Also the embassy, U.S. embassy, or whatever embassy you're associated with, put that in here as well. Because if you lose your phone, how are you going to remember all those numbers? All right, so I've got like 24 numbers on here that I can recall off of this Databank. So I wear this while I'm traveling, while I'm on the move when it comes to the car, planes, trains, and automobiles. That's what I'm wearing. I'm wearing this for. And I've gotten comments too on the F91. Hey, the F91 is a great travel watch because you can use it as your alarm clock. It's super easy. It's a backup watch if you ever need one. I think this is the better backup watch to the F91 and redundancy for your phone. So if you need to have an alarm on here, you can set the alarm, no problem. Okay, and there's how many alarms in here? Let's see. We got to go through this way, I think. I'm so used to using the buttons. Yeah, so there's 5 alarms. Yeah, like this is a great traveling watch. So you can have this set up with you. It's fantastic for that reason. So to me, F91 is like in the dust when it comes down to actual functional use. There are much better versions of other things out here. This is one of them. So when it comes down to uses, the DBC or the Databank is going to get that one as well. So 4-1, not even close. Very much worth the money. Now, this is the most expensive one. This one I think was in the mid-60s. So these are not cheap. Okay, and the metal version is a little bit more. And I believe this was right around the $60 range. So to me, this DBC32 is absolutely worth the money. Absolutely worth it. Okay, and the CA-53 is, it's okay. If you want the classic though, and again, like this is the F91 argument. If you want the classic, this is one of the icons of Casio. And I just published a video on this not too long ago, that the F91 and the Square are the 3 icons of Casio in my opinion. Okay, when you talk about Casio, those are the 3 that come up. And I know the Royale is another one, but the Royale has nothing to do with Casino Royale. It just is close in name. And they just came up with Casio, Casino, okay, the whole thing, and the Royale, whatever. This actually, has the history of the movie in it. It's also one of the earlier Casio, or one of the earlier calculator watches. So for that reason, there's a lot of good things about this watch as far as a vintage, kind of a nod to the Casio history. So I have no problem. I'm hanging on to this one, the CA-53. I'm hanging on to it just like I'm hanging on to the F91. So no problem whatsoever with these watches, but definitely the DBC or the Databanks are going to get the nod for this one. So of the 2 Databanks, which one would I go with? I would definitely go with the 32. It's just easier to read. You want a little more nostalgia, go with the 611. The 611 works just fine. The modules inside here are pretty much the same, although I will say this, the light on the 611 sucks. It's an F91-esque type light. It lights up half the screen and that's it. Like what good is it if you only see what the hour is and you don't see what the minutes are? Okay. So for me, the DBC32 is the way to go. All right. So there you go. There's the throwdown for this session of, this episode of the throwdowns. And we're going to go with the Databanks. Clearly, it wasn't really much of a challenge, although the Casios did get it on the water resistance rating, which is a surprise. There actually is a water resistance rating on these calculator watches. So let me know what you think of these watches. My name's Tim. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you guys next time.